Let's call it what it is. You're not ready. And if you're being honest, you've known it for a while. This isn't criticism, it's recognition. A quiet truth that's been pulsing underneath the noise of your daily life. You've felt it, not in loud breakdowns, but in subtle emptiness. That strange ache in the middle of calm. That hollowness even when things seem fine. It's not random. It's not weakness. It's a signal. It's the universe preparing you before it hands you what you've asked for. Because it never gives gifts to the unprepared. That's not cruelty. It's wisdom. And if you're paying attention, you'll notice the pattern. Right before something significant is meant to come into your life, everything else starts to fall apart. Suddenly, the ground you stood on becomes unsteady. Relationships shift. Your health stumbles. Projects stall. Motivation disappears. And you think, why now? You think you're regressing. But in truth, you're being peeled back, stripped of what isn't real, shaken free from what cannot come with you. This is not punishment, it's purification. Because you can't fake readiness. You can't skip the inner work and expect the external prize. You have to become the kind of person who can hold the thing you've been asking for, without collapsing under its weight. And that kind of becoming isn't comfortable. It requires death. And by death, I don't mean the body. I mean the ego, the identity you built to protect yourself, that now keeps you small. Carl Jung understood this deeply. When the unconscious tires of waiting, it doesn't whisper. It disrupts. It sends chaos, because chaos is the natural language of soul-level transformation. It doesn't care how put together your life looks. It cares whether you're aligned. And if you're not, it will make sure you can no longer pretend. That job you lost, that relationship that fell apart when you needed it most, the betrayal that cut deeper than it should have. None of it was coincidence. It was surgery. It was the universe removing what no longer fits. But instead of seeing it as healing, you called it injustice. Let's be clear. The biggest wall between you and the life you want isn't external. It's not the economy, not your ex, not the system. It's the outdated version of you clinging to control, the part of you that wants to change, but not transform. That wants the reward, but not the risk. That wants the future, but not the death of comfort. And yes, it is a kind of death, a necessary one. Because no new self is born without letting go of the old. The ego resists this. Of course it does. It was built to avoid pain. But now it's the very thing standing between you and your growth. And so when the moment of change comes, the ego doesn't quietly step aside. It fights, it argues, it tells stories, it distracts you with logic. It makes you doubt your timing, and that's when the suffering begins, not because you're on the wrong path, but because you won't surrender to the right one. But suffering is not the enemy, it's the signal. It's the fire at the threshold between the self you've outgrown and the one you're being asked to become. It burns because it's working, because it's doing what comfort never could. And that silence you've been feeling lately, that emptiness that feels like floating between worlds, that's not abandonment. It's the stillness before the breakthrough. It's the void between the collapse and the creation. It's sacred soil, but only if you stop trying to escape it and choose to plant something real. Because this moment, this strange, confusing, painful pause, isn't meaningless. It's the space where everything shifts. The moment when you get to decide, repeat the past, or build something new. And if you're brave enough, this is where the real questions begin. Look inward. What habits are you still defending? What fears are you still feeding? What identity are you afraid to release? The universe is asking. Not in words, but in experience. And if you don't answer with action, nothing changes. Not because you're unworthy, but because you're not yet able to hold what's on the other side. Because life doesn't reward desire. It rewards embodiment. You've come this far. So let's look closer. This isn't just about being tested, it's about being revealed. Most people think they're being broken when life gets hard, that they're being punished, blocked, forgotten. But that's not it. The universe doesn't test to watch you suffer. It tests to strip away the noise. Because beneath your goals, your image, your performance, there's something more important. What's true? And that's what difficulty brings to the surface. Not new pain, but old patterns. The ones you've hidden behind your busyness. The parts of you that only show up under pressure. That's why this hurts so much. Because the more things fall apart on the outside, the more truth comes forward from within. And some of it isn't pretty. Your need to be validated by others before making a decision. Your fear of being alone, masked as loyalty. Your tendency to shrink so you don't outshine the people around you. The way you disguise fear as logic. It was always there, but now you can't ignore it. Because pressure doesn't create your cracks, it shows them. And once you've seen them, you can't go back to pretending they're not there. This is the point where many turn away. They convince themselves the pain is pointless, that it's all random, that the universe is against them. But the truth is, they've been shown a mirror and couldn't stand to look. Here's the pivot. This isn't about strength, it's about vision. Life's not asking you to power through. It's asking you to see. To see what you've been carrying that's not yours. What you've been believing that no longer serves you. What you've been acting out unconsciously since you were too young to choose differently. The universe isn't punishing you. It's revealing your patterns, your beliefs, your shadow, that part of you that you buried so you could be accepted, that you silenced so you wouldn't be abandoned, that you rejected so you could feel in control. Jung said it best. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that's what these moments are. Spotlights on the very places you've avoided for years. That's why your life feels stuck. Because evolution doesn't happen by pretending you're already healed. It happens when you look directly at the wound and finally stop apologizing for having it. But here's the most dangerous lie. That you have time. That you can wait a little longer before doing the real work. That the call will come again, later. You don't know that. And you're already in the fire. Letting go isn't giving up, it's trusting. It's saying, I don't understand this yet, but I'm willing to stop clinging to what clearly isn't working. That's not weakness, that's the start of power. Because real awakening doesn't look like bliss. It looks like clarity that hurts. It looks like crying in your car on a regular afternoon, realizing you can't keep living like this. It looks like walking away from what used to define you and daring to believe something deeper can take its place. It's not flashy, it's not comfortable, but it's real. And real is what changes you. Not the performance, not the theories, not the language of healing without the cost. The universe isn't trying to entertain you, it's trying to wake you up, to remind you that everything you're chasing is already inside of you, but trapped under fear, pride, and the illusion of control. You want a new life? Good. But make no mistake, the cost is your current identity, not because it's wrong, but because it's unfinished, because it was built in survival, not in truth. And that's where this goes next. Understanding the difference between surviving and living, because the ego survives. But the soul? It lives. Let's confront something you might not want to admit. It's not the universe that's holding you back anymore. It's you. Not because you're lazy, not because you're weak, but because somewhere inside, there's a part of you that's terrified, not of falling, but of flying. And that part of you has been whispering sabotage in the voice of reason. Because what if you succeed? What if you actually become who you're meant to be? What if the vision you've seen in flashes becomes your reality, and now you're the one who has to own it, hold it, live it? Suddenly, there's nowhere left to hide. That's why it's easier to stay in motion, learning more, planning more, preparing more. Infinite preparation becomes the perfect distraction. It feels like progress, but it's not. It's the mind building a fortress of safety around your fear, and here's what's worse. It works. You stay busy, you stay informed, you stay stuck. But it doesn't feel like stuckness because you've dressed it in the language of self-development. You tell yourself, I need more clarity. I need to be 100% healed first. I'll move when I'm sure it's the right time. But clarity doesn't come before the leap. It comes after. Because the universe doesn't reward preparation. It rewards decision. Not a reckless, ego-driven decision, but a soul-level yes that doesn't need to be wrapped in certainty to be real. And here's the brutal truth most won't say out loud. Your old self can't come with you. You can't drag your unhealed patterns into the new chapter and expect it to read differently. You can't carry the roles you played to survive and expect to thrive. You can't walk into expansion still chained to the version of you that was built on avoidance, control, and smallness. If you do, you'll just recreate the past, with new faces, new jobs, new goals, but the same underlying frequency. You'll call it bad luck. But it will be repetition. This is the cycle. You get an opportunity, you hesitate, you rationalize, you retreat. The window closes. You tell yourself the timing wasn't right. And the universe watches, not judging, not punishing, just observing whether you're aligned with what you say you want. Because desire alone means nothing. You have to match it. And matching it means being willing to let go of everything that doesn't. Let go of the identity built around pain. Let go of the comfort that's become a cage. Let go of needing every outcome guaranteed before you move. And yes, it's terrifying. But ask yourself, which is worse? Risking what's familiar to become who you truly are, or staying in a loop of almosts, maybes, and next times, while the real you waits behind the gate you refuse to walk through? This is what awakening costs, the ability to lie to yourself and believe it. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Even if you try to go back to your old patterns, they won't feel the same. Even if you distract yourself with noise, silence finds its way back in. Even if you tell yourself, I'm fine, the universe keeps asking. But are you aligned? And you'll feel it, in your body, in your dreams, in that growing gap between who you are and who you know you're meant to be. So here you are, at the gate. You can wait, you can explain, you can analyze, or you can walk through. Because the next chapter doesn't begin when something external changes. It begins when you do. No one warns you about this part. That before you become who you're meant to be, you'll have to grieve the person you thought you were. And not just lightly, not just philosophically, but completely, viscerally, in your bones. Because you didn't build that version of yourself for fun. You built them to survive. You shaped that personality to feel safe, to be loved, to avoid rejection, to keep peace in rooms where your truth wasn't welcome. And now, for the first time, you're being asked to let them go. And yes, it feels like loss, because it is. It's losing the identity you spent years maintaining, losing the mask that helped you belong, losing the lies that once felt like protection. This is the part of transformation no one glamorizes, not the breakthrough, not the revelation, but the quiet death of the version of you who made it this far, and who cannot come any further. It hurts, it's confusing, it's disorienting. Because if you're not that identity anymore, who are you? This is the void, the in-between, the holy space after letting go but before becoming. And in that space, everything inside you will want to turn back, to rebuild the mask, to explain yourself again, to make it all make sense. But the soul doesn't need explanations. It needs room to breathe. So if you're feeling lost, uncertain, detached from who you were but not yet anchored in who you're becoming, that's not failure. That's transformation in real time. That's the soul standing in the ashes of the old self, waiting to rise not as an upgrade, but as something entirely new. And yes, there's grief. There's grief for the time you spent pretending. Grief for the power you gave away to be accepted. Grief for how long you settled, stayed quiet, or stayed small. Let it come. Because that grief, that ache in your chest that says, I can't go back, but I don't know who I am now, that is the doorway. And on the other side of that doorway, presence, not perfection, not clarity, not control, just presence. The ability to sit in your own skin without needing to perform, to act without needing applause, to speak without rehearsing, to rest in who you are. Because you've finally stopped pretending to be someone else, this is where the universe starts to respond. Not because you've become enlightened, but because you've become real. And when you're real, raw, honest, stripped of the masks, you become magnetic. Not to attention, but to alignment. You don't have to chase clarity. It begins to find you. You don't have to push for signs. You are the sign. Your frequency shifts. And everything that matches it begins to arrive, not because you're manifesting, but because you're no longer in conflict with yourself. And this, finally, is what surrender really means. Not giving up, but giving in to the truth you've been circling for years. You stop resisting. You stop negotiating with your soul. You stop trying to fit into places that were never meant for your becoming. And the universe? It doesn't need your perfection. It doesn't even need your confidence. It just needs you to stop hiding. Because when you stop hiding, everything begins to align. Not instantly, not painlessly, but undeniably. You step into a current that was always there, waiting for the moment your energy finally said yes. Not a yes of words, but a yes of being. So here you are. Not at the end of the path, but at its most honest beginning. Not the version of you who started this process, but the one who has walked through fire, silence, doubt, and grief, and is still standing. Not because you had all the answers, but because something inside you refused to turn back. And now comes the final decision. Because change doesn't happen when you think it might be a good idea. It happens when you decide, without fanfare, without certainty, without a guarantee, that the version of you you've clung to for survival is no longer enough for where you're going. It happens when you move, not because everything makes sense, but because your soul whispers, go anyway. And this is where you separate from the crowd, because most people won't take this step. They'll read, they'll nod, they'll agree in theory, but when the moment comes to act, they'll flinch. They'll retreat to the familiar discomfort they've learned to call home. Not because they don't want more, but because they never let themselves become someone who could hold more. That's not you. Not anymore. You've already crossed the line most never do. You've seen through your own illusions, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. You can't pretend the small life still fits. You can't pretend the old identity still feels like home. So now, there's only one thing left. To choose, not with words, not with another plan, but with how you move, how you speak, how you show up when no one's clapping. Because this moment, right now, is the test, not when everything is working. Now, when it's quiet, when it's uncertain, when the leap is still in front of you. This is where the universe watches closely, not to judge, but to reflect, to mirror your frequency, not your fantasies. And that's the most powerful truth of all. The universe doesn't respond to what you want. It responds to what you are. When your energy is split between longing and fear, between vision and self-betrayal, life will reflect that incoherence. But when your words, your actions, your beliefs, and your boundaries align, everything changes. Not overnight, not all at once, but unavoidably, because life begins to organize around coherence. Not effort, not perfection, coherence. And coherence doesn't mean certainty, it means honesty. It means choosing to live from your truth, even when you don't know where it leads. That's the paradox. When you stop needing the future to arrive, you become the kind of person it can't help but meet. Because you're no longer chasing alignment. You are alignment. You're no longer asking for signs. You're moving like someone who already received them. And maybe you don't feel ready. Maybe the fear is still in your throat, and the doubts still tap on your shoulder. But readiness isn't a feeling. It's a decision. So decide. Decide not to go back. Decide to stop apologizing for your intuition. Decide that your growth no longer needs permission. Decide that the real you, the one who's been quietly waiting behind every mask, is finally the one who gets to lead. And when you do, the shift won't just be internal. Doors will open, people will fall away, new ones will find you. The path won't be smooth, but it will be yours. And that's what it's always been about. Not becoming someone different, but becoming yourself without compromise. The one the universe has been waiting for. So if you've made it here, if this has stirred something deep and real within you, don't make this just another moment of reflection. Make it the beginning of embodiment. Because now you know, you were never being punished. You were being prepared. And now the preparation is over. Step forward. Not to chase the life you want, but to meet it as the person who finally matches it.